Velkommen til Learn.tech, en læringsdugnad om teknologi og samfunn, med Silvija Ceres og venner.
Hello and welcome to a Learn Conversation. My name is Silvija Ceres and my guests today are Rune Torhaug, who is Director of EU Affairs in DNV, and Klas Bendrik, who is the Chief Digital and Development Officer in DNV. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I floundered on those titles, but they are quite heavy, so I will have to ask you to explain on them in a second. I will introduce the series very briefly before we get started with the conversation, just so people know what they're listening to. And so this one is a conversation in a series that Learn is doing together with the Norwegian School of Economics for a course that's running as a pilot in the autumn of 2021, focused on digitalization, sustainability, and strategy. And all the 6 conversations in the series are done with people from the company DNV, the Norske Veritas, where I am a board member, and where you are 2 people most responsible for the strategy that we are building at the moment. DNV is a more than 150-year-old company, but also one of the most innovative and international companies I know of. And so the work that you have created around sustainability as a growth engine and sustainability as a strategic driver, I think was perhaps the best example of sustainability in practice that I've seen anywhere. So the focus of this conversation, Rune and Klas, will be on how do you work with strategy and how do you involve the organization in what you believe is the necessary and positive disruption that's bridging us with tomorrow. Does that sound okay?
Yeah. Perfect. Exciting topic.
Very good. So we'll get back to strategy and sustainability in a second, but my first question is always, who are you and what drives you? And perhaps we can start with Klas. Who's Klas?
Thank you. And my name is Klas Bendrik. I'm Swedish by nationality. My home is outside Gothenburg with my family, having 3 kids. But my working location is, as you said, Silvia, DNV is a global organization. So you can say the world is the working field, but the head office is based in Høvik, just outside of Oslo. And when I'm not working, I also have a very strong sense for the ocean. I like doing everything associated with water. If it's swimming, if it's sailing, just being on the ocean, I enjoy that environment very much, which also fits very well to DNV and also the future when it comes to sustainability and the importance of the ocean. And if I'm not on the ocean in my spare time, I love riding a bike, but I'm also a sponsor. I'm actually a sponsor of a horse to my daughter, and that I've figured out is an extensive sponsorship, but it's also a fun sponsorship. So those are a few aspects of who I am.
I have been warned very strictly not to become a horse sponsor by people who tell me that, you know what's the best way to get a little rich, slightly rich?
No, please share.
So it's by starting being very rich and then sponsoring a horse.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that journey. But I've also learned that young kids that actively work with horses become excellent leaders in the business environment, and that is what I'm betting for.
It's very good, and I think also there are many ways of doing this that are very sustainable, both financially and very good for environmental sustainability as well. So all credits for doing the sponsorship class. You're also a Swedish Navy Academy graduate.
Yes, I started my career and I was on the edge of actually being officer in the Swedish Navy and actually not being in the business environment. So I enjoyed the Swedish Navy and being in the military very much. But I also realized that is a fantastic start of a career. But then it's great to be at the ocean, being on ships, etc. and so on. However, when you go up in the career in the military and in the Navy, you end up actually running a desk. And then when you do that, then of course running a desk is actually practically a little bit more interesting actually in the business environment. So I had the opportunity of actually doing two great things, getting a great start in the Swedish Navy and having that experience, but then also gradually transformed into much more of, you can say, a business-oriented career. So having the best of two worlds.
Sounds very cool. What about you, Rune?
I'm Rune Torhaug, and I live at Høvik in Bærum, quite close to the DNV office, actually. And in addition to the, I would say, quite typical Norwegian interest, like skiing in the winter and hiking in the mountains in the summer, I have, even though I'm trained as an engineer, I have always been a keen reader, try to understand interactions between how society works and how technology impacts society, and the kind of the link between business, society, and technology. So I enjoy a lot, reading a lot.
Rune, we won't spend much time on Høvik, but I just want to say to the listeners that if you haven't been there, it's probably one of the nicest spots in Norway. So you're a very lucky man, both working and living there. But I want to ask you about your PhD. So you are a civil engineer from our technical university in Norway, NTNU, but then you went to Stanford.
Yes.
Why did you choose to go to Stanford, and what value does it bring to your job now?
I think the reason for going to Stanford was just that I had an interest to learn a little bit more after I finished my master's in Trondheim, and actually it was on a scholarship from DNV. So DNV encouraged me to take some particular training. So at that time we focused a lot on structured reliability, trying to understand how to make structures safe enough, even though the waves are big on ships and structures. And at Stanford, there was a particular good, some particularly good professors that worked with earthquakes on structures, on civil engineering structures. So what we tried to do was to take the methods and thinking behind earthquake engineering into offshore engineering. So modeling of natural phenomena applied to structures, being it ships, offshore platforms, bridges, whatever, and make sure they are safe enough, but not too safe, because then it gets too expensive for society. So the motivation was basically that it was. Yeah, of course, it's a nice place. So that in itself was, let's say, motivating. But it was, at the time, I was very much driven by trying to understand more and contribute more to the safety of structures, because I found it very interesting. So, yeah.
So I think it's really interesting to just have the perspective that it takes some heavy-duty technical understanding in order to understand how to make the most sustainable structures that provide us with energy, with oil and gas, and safety at sea, perhaps.
Yeah.
So we'll get back to that, and also you have your current job now, Rune, that kind of adds another topic to the ones that we were actually planning to talk about. So we were planning to talk about your strategy work as a team and as a company that relates sustainability with growth. But we are also going to talk a little bit about EU regulations as they relate to artificial intelligence and basically future both data flows but also money flows.
Yeah. DNV, we have, even though we're a very global company, we have about 50% of the business in Europe. So of course, European regulation is extremely important for DNV, and with Europe being very let's say, forward-leaning both on the green field and the digital field these days. And we talk about the Brussels effect, that European legislation like the GDPR or as an example, tends to be embraced by the whole world as a way to regulate important topics for society. So to follow what's going on in the EU and try to help out, if we put it that way, or to let's say try to help businesses in making sense of it is it is important, and I think DNV we are trying to play a role there. And you, as you said, I spend a lot of time in Brussels trying to try to make sense and let's say interpret and see how we can help out with making sense of it.
Very good. We might get back to the regulation of technology in the future, as we've discussed after we've discussed strategy. But what I'd really like you guys to comment on. So, Klas, you're responsible for the digitalization as a topic in the company, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about how's that different from, talking about disruptive technologies that you talk about in this Technology Outlook Report 2030.
Yeah.
You want to start, Klas?
Yeah, I can do that. And very much when we in DNV talk about digitalization, we talk about it from you can say two different perspectives. One is around business optimization in order for us to focus on how do we improve productivity, how do we interact in a better, more integrated way with our customers. So it becomes much more of optimizing the business and the revenue that we have today. The second part is much more about business transformation. And there we talk much more about new products enabled by technology, enabled by digital technologies, but also how new business models comes into the equation. So those are, you can say, the two main topics that we talk about when it comes to digitalization. And what we highlighted in the Technology Outlook 2030, as you flashed there, Silvija, I think it's much more around new products and the potential impact that might have on business models. But that one goes much broader for a different set of industries, both the ones we are operating in today as a company, but also how technology impacts the society at large, but also other type of industries. So for me, digitalization is both driving the internal productivity, how we work with customers, but also to foster a culture, an innovation culture, to actually embrace new technology also towards our customer and the customer future needs.
I'm looking at this report, and by the way, we are going to supply a link to it from the page of this podcast or this case. But basically, it looks at the world today and at the world in 2030. And it says, for example, that population is going up by 10%. The population of 65 years old, though, is going up by almost 30%. Then the GDP is going up by 43%. And I think Corona has messed that up already. So, how are we going to fund all the needs in a larger but also much, much aging population? And then you show that the energy demand is only growing by 9%. So it's growing much slower than the population and the GDP. And so it just in those four numbers that I mentioned shows how technology helps drive sustainability. Because without technology, the energy needs would grow at least as fast as the population. And then... Sorry, go ahead.
Just to build on what Klas said and what you said, I think it is a very important observation. I mean, concretely, of course, electrification contributes a lot to energy efficiency, which that's an important part of the equation. But the whole concept of technology improving the way we use resources and increase productivity, I mean, that has been a trend through history all the way, right? I mean, that's basically how modern societies have been shaped is taking on board new technology, improve productivity, and hence give more people access to better lives, really. And I think that is basically what is continuing today, that we are able to use resources more effectively. Of course, then the link to sustainability, I mean, the positive link to sustainability is, of course, that we use resources more effectively. The negative side is that, as we all know, we are overusing resources today, which is basically because of the same reason, that we are giving more people access to better lives, and naturally then people use more resources. So the dilemma right now basically is that of course we need to give people access to better lives, but we have to manage how we use resources in a much better way if we shall, let's say, also the next generation shall have good lives. So that's at the core of it. So even though it's going, I mean, the numbers are positive, as you say, I mean, but we know there's an enormous challenge in balancing this out, and that's the sustainability dilemma, I guess.
I think that the way that you've laid this out also in the report is you talk, for example, about trends, mega trends, societies, and then you break technologies into enabling and these business model driving technologies that Klas was talking about. I just want to talk about the 6 categories of digitalization that appear in this report. So, or you talk about signature of 6 digital technology trends that will shape our world towards 2030. The first one is connecting people to the internet more intimately. So we will live our lives and very intimate parts of our lives online and digitally. There will be ubiquitous sensors with IoT. There will be computing and communication everywhere. There will be artificial intelligence in everything. Platform-based economic models and social models are becoming the norm. And the last one is digitalization of material. Additive manufacturing, nanotechnology, all the material technology stuff. So these are 6 complex trends. We can't all have a PhD in all of them. How can normal people think about, this thoroughly technologized digital future and make sense of it in their businesses? Where do we start?
Yeah.
Klas.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question, but I think in those aspects. But my piece of advice to business leaders and other type of organizations is to look at what is happening among their customers and which journey their customer is embarking. And by that, they will also see which potential of these 6 or other topics related to technology that have an impact on their customers, and actually work with those topics. And then set aside a little bit of business development, research capabilities internally, and engage on those topics together with customers. Because the customers are in many occasions struggling on the same topics, and just reaching out cross borders more in a much more joint industry projects, collaborating jointly in delivering on something, that is much more productive because it generates learning. So, for example, how to collaborate, for example, what Internet of Things can bring between partners, how to actually work, for example, in areas like digital health as an application, which will totally transform, you can say, the healthcare system over time. But of course, the transformation didn't start within digital health. It actually started in the telco industry and in the consumer goods industry, but is now being transformed and applied to another industry segment. And that, I think, is an important aspect and a suggestion of mine for a clear takeaway. Set aside some resources, collaborate with your most important and progressive customers, and see what that embarks to.
To me, it sounds a little bit like you're challenging both the way of delivery today, but also the business model of today with that.
I think the business model today for many companies, you can say, is actually very solid, because also through the pandemic, you see that revenues might have gone a little bit up and down, but for many companies, they are pretty solid. And also the bottom line is for many companies being pretty solid. Of course, some industries, some segments are truly challenged. But looking at the future, of course, technology changes the business model. Today, you can actually say that many business models are based on hours. The input from individuals have a price, and that is a part of the price point for a product or a service. And that business model is valid today, it delivers value. However, long-term wise, it will be dramatically challenged. And in order not to end up in being too challenged, my advice and my experience also shows that try out new business models, dare to test them, and also maybe fail on them, but you will still learn a lot. And try it out, but not jeopardizing the whole company at once, but take small segments, small service line, or set up smaller companies on the side where you actually generate that learning. So I think the learning part and be bold enough to try it out is important.
And if I may build on that, I think it is very important now to try to really understand the technologies that more people and people, more business people need to, let's say, not only understand the buzzwords, but actually go a little bit behind it and understand what's there. And at the same time, let's say, appreciate or realize that we do not understand everything. No one understands everything, and no one understands completely how this will turn out or play out. So as Klas is saying, to play and test and test small scale together with others, try to understand what's happening in other industries. It will be very important, because this will be shaped as we move forward to a very large degree. So,
if I am to make a bumper sticker from what you're saying, it's don't fight the change, drive the change. And from what I hear you say as well, you say that we need a few hypotheses about the new. Nobody knows, but we need to guess, and then we need to test. So I think that the two of you have been driving a really interesting strategic process for DNV itself. And I would like you to tell us a little bit about the process. How was it structured? And what's your learning?
Yeah. And I can start with that. And I think for me, being fairly new into a company with a history of more than 150 years, it was and is a really fantastic privilege to be so heavily involved together with Rune and a few other players on articulating the strategy towards 2025. But having that aspect of defining a strategy, the first big question we had was, how long in these times of turbulence, new technology, how long is a strategy period? Is it 1 year? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? And that, I think, is an important aspect to highlight. So we bounced a little bit about that. So we ended up more or less saying, well, actions are on a 1 year basis. A long horizon is towards 10 years. So certain aspects look far ahead, like the technology outlook. But then you also need to find a balance by being concrete and specific. And there we landed on having a 5-year approach. So we as an organization, a global organization, also can deliver some impact before we actually having it being revised. Then naturally, after approval for a 5-year strategy, we also come into an aspect of having at least yearly reviews, yearly updates, and some of those updates are more major than other updates. So that, I think, is the first important aspect. And the second aspect, which I would like to highlight before you can step in, Rune, and show a few aspects around how we looked at the outside world, we also defined a few principles that were important for us. And for us, it was important that it built upon our purpose, especially linked to safeguarding life, property, and the environment, also built upon our vision, but also then naturally took in the perspective of having both growth as an ambition, but also making sure that we are successful over time. So also making sure that we are resilient over time, pending how our industries are working. But then also it was very important for us to both build upon our history, but also be bold and transformative when it is required, and also where our customer segments are requiring this. So both building on our strength, but also be transformative. And then the last one as a principle for this was also to create a big engagement. Big engagement among our employees, among our important research stakeholders, among our important customers in getting their input on the journey ahead, but also looking at researchers, universities, and other important persons and institutions to give us input and learnings around strategy making and what we can expect for the future. So those are a few examples around what we created as a basis for the time horizon, as well as the principles we applied for the strategy initially. And then maybe, Rune, if you would say a few words around the approach we used.
Yes. I guess in every strategy process or in anything anybody does that are pointing to the future, it's a combination of understanding how the world works, meaning which trends will be shaping the world in the years to come, and a self-assessment, meaning how do we create value today and how can we create value in the future, and then combine the two things, meaning combining where do we see the world going, where do we see our own value creation going, and where can we be at our best, meaning within which areas can we play, and exactly what will we do to win within the segments that we decide to play within. And then, of course, I mean, when we try to assess how the world works, as Klas said, I mean, we don't do that alone. I mean, we have a lot of very insightful people within the company, and we of course we used those resources, but we also engaged with the academia, other businesses, consulting companies that also think about the future. So we try to really very broadly understand how the world works. And then on the internal side, that is a lot linked. I mean, when I say how we create value, that is linked to business models to a large degree. What are the fundamentals? And we also can try to really address and articulate how have we created success in the past? Where do we have the highest likelihood of winning? And for us, of course, as an independent assurance and risk management company, it's a lot about where there's regulatory and technical complexity, where there is high risk, and where there's a combination of the two. Then there's typically a need for being competent, and that's where we find our sweet spots, really.
So I want to bring in a perspective from the board here. And it's basically that in many strategy processes elsewhere, I experienced that the company develops, a very advanced strategy, and then you have a strategy day with the board, and basically you're presented what's pretty much a final outcome. I really want to compliment you on involving many of these stakeholders, including the board, all through the process. Because then at the end, we all understood it, and we all felt that, it makes sense. Maybe it's even the only way forward. So I want to ask you a little bit about, how do you create space to do that without actually but the problem with boards and many other stakeholders is that, they want you to figure out digitalization and tell them what's going to happen. And very often, therefore, there is a business model saying that, here we are and we do our service today, and then some magic happens, and then we become a platform company. And that magic, that we'll figure out as we go along. And what I think you did differently is that you gave us 8 examples. We could be doing these 8 things. as platforms? You know, what do you think works? What do you think would work slightly better if we tweaked it? And by working with concrete stuff, you know, in health assurance or in energy optimization in energy markets, or, you know, very concrete things, the board started to understand what does a platform-based business model really mean for us? What does a data-driven company look like if it's with our heritage? So, you know, how did you create those hypotheses, and how did you manage to get the stakeholders to kind of start agreeing?
I think maybe I could start on this one, Klas, because I think Silvija, I think the starting point was really out of respect for all the competence in the board. I mean, meaning that we felt that we had some idea about concepts that we had to vet with the board in respect for all the competence in the board. I mean, that was a starting point, meaning that we truly believed that we will have a better result in the end if we did it that way. I think that was at least a starting point. But then, of course, we also realized, exactly as you say, I mean, it's much easier to have a good conversation with people that with a mixed background, the more concrete we are able to be as basis for discussion. So that was also a very conscious choice to try to, let's say, articulate as precisely as possible and bring to the table as good basis for discussion as possible in order to get help to improve what we have already done. So I think that was the thinking behind it, at least as I saw it. But maybe you will add on to that, Klas.
No, but I think you're spot on. And I think in addition to what you said, Rune, we also did a similar approach, Silvija, towards some internal key stakeholders. And almost we engaged 10% of the staff we have in DNV during the strategy process. So we also got a lot of input from internal stakeholders. We did similar exercises with some of the external advisors, but also with academia and a few other experts, including the board of directors. So we got similar questions popped and asked to those teams. And then, of course, we compiled the hypothesis, and then we brought it for verification to the board of directors. So become much more a journey which was created while we were walking. And that aspect was really important. Then in addition to that, we also took the liberty or the opportunity to also have one-to-one sessions with the board members. And that was, I felt, also really valuable for us in the strategy team, but also really appreciated by the board of directors, because then you could go even more deep in the specific, you can say, subject matter expert areas, which were a little bit different by the board members. And that was also very, very useful during the process. And not only a one-timer, but actually, maybe thanks to you can say, COVID, we also ended up in having a little bit of a longer strategy process than originally planned, which also made us a little bit more active, you can say, in engaging with the board of directors, and also partly completing the strategy process purely digitally using Teams and other tools for the collaboration. And that also created a different type of engagement, but also a successful engagement.
So I just want to comment very quickly on one thing there. I think you were very good also at figuring out new rules of the road, new ways of interacting when we had to do strategy sessions digitally. I mean, normally it's a nightmare to listen to hours on end on a team meeting, but you brought it down to many smaller sections. And then you told us that, you know, these are the 2 questions that we will want you to answer after every of those sections. And this is the order in which we will be asking you to take the floor. And you only have 2 minutes each, so that, you know, it became manageable and it became also active. And so I think that's an important part of figuring out how to work strategy in both COVID, but also post-COVID times. But something I'd really like to ask both you and Rune, you choose who goes first now, is your work with champions. Because one of the things that I think worked really well in this process is that you managed to find a group of people who were more impatient than the rest to bring about this necessary change. And these were the people that actually helped formulate some of the most important hypotheses. And how did that work out? What are your lessons learned? Do you want to go first, Rune? Or?
No, I can actually go first on that one, because that was primarily, this was a conversation initially between myself and our chief people officer and our CEO, how to create the strategy team. And of course, the first exercise was to practically assign a project manager and a project leader for it. And that became an excellent choice and a performance in the end by Rune. And then, of course, myself, our CEO, Remi, and our group people officer, Gro, we also then decided, how will we pick a team that will both build upon our history, but also be able to cover the transformative part. And then we very much also looked at our succession planning list and looked at people who we feel are really progressive, but they can also represent the company really well. And then we actually combined that into, you can say, our core strategy team, which was then run by myself and Rune and our colleague Silvija in over a period of a little bit more than a year. So you can say it was a deliberate pick of people that can both represent the history, but also be bold enough and important stakeholders internally to actually, you can say, sow the seeds for the future and the future success.
And then maybe in addition to that, maybe what you're pointing at, Silvija, is also that at the same time there's been a selection of a larger group of people from all over the organization identified as strategy champions, and those were, let's say, not so deeply engaged as the team that Klas talks about, but they were more brought into the conversation and took ownership at a later stage in the development process, or more into the implementation of the strategy. I think that's also an element that helps in engaging the wider organization. So.
I also want to ask you a little bit about Troublemakers. So, DNV is so correct and so politically correct and so sustainable, and everybody, but in order to get people who are willing to be transformative, you have to have that troublemaker gene as well. People who dare to challenge. How do you build courage in people to challenge?
One reflection I make, if I go first through without having all the full history of DNV, I think having people to challenge is never a problem in DNV. We have a lot of people that dare to challenge because we have so many fantastic experts that have so much knowledge in different perspectives. So what I feel and see is that people dare to challenge. The biggest challenge I see is to actually combine all that knowledge and actually select a vital few areas to say, yes, we have a number of challenges, we have a number of opportunities, but what is actually our big bet? What are we really betting for and really would like to execute forceful in the next period? That becomes the real challenge in that. Because it is, if you have a number of really talented engineers, a lot of people with technology background, financial background, you put something on the table, you get a lot of feedback.
Yeah. So professionally proud geeks will fight for their causes. So the question is basically how to prioritize and unite.
Yeah, and also get them people to understand that there are different perspectives, but at some point in time, we need to make a bet. Because otherwise we don't move forward.
Yeah. What do you think, Rune?
No, I think, let's say, challenging micro, if I may say, meaning challenging small things. I don't think that is not the challenge in DNV. Meaning people are recruited and trained for asking questions with everything. Actually challenging things so that they shall not go wrong. I think maybe the hardest part is to challenge more on the conceptual level, the more overall level. That takes a different attitude and a different maturity, both to challenge and to absorb the challenge. And that is, of course, more difficult. I think one important aspect there is to have a combination of people that have spent most of their life outside DNV and some that have spent their life mostly within, and then make a mix of that. Because then if you come from the outside, like Klas did some years ago, you naturally ask different questions. And by combining that with people that will and maybe instinctively resist, but if people are, let's say, mature enough, they will absorb the important part, and together then we will make better progress, I think. So a combination of, let's say, people that are mostly trained outside, but still having respect for the internal culture, and vice versa. I mean, because if you only train internally and do not have respect for what other people bring to the table, then it doesn't make sense. So you need both, and you need respect between the two sides. I think this last element is very, very important, I think.
And I think it's also so. Klas talked about prioritization and basically unifying and the necessity to take bets. You talk about respecting the different perspectives and making room for a combination of those. Positive friction is, I think, also a nice image here. I really like all of your perspectives. I think that strategy work too often bears, a trend of. Let's just check the boxes and then we conclude that this is all very important and it's really very urgent, but we refuse to be very concrete. And I think that the way that you were concrete and disruptive with a smile and encouragement and made it into everybody's strategy was wonderful. We are running out of time. I want to put two topics still on the table, and we'll try to go through them very quickly. I think that also what you said, Rune, about one thing is challenging scientifically or technically something, but the other thing is challenging the identity of the company. And many companies at the moment are trying to make this transition where actually their core identity is at stake. You're going from being a product company or a services company or a solutions company to a platform company, data-driven, AI-enabled, algorithms-driven. And, I think the really difficult challenge in these strategies is understanding completely new business models. And I want to ask both of you, what role do technologists have in driving the new business models, and what role do business people have in understanding how technology does that? So it's kind of the interplay of technology and business, and how do you create new financial value, new social value? The other question I'd like us to spend just a few minutes on is Rune's statement saying that assurance of digital assets is an immature field. We are trying to build an understanding that assurance of algorithms will be as important as assurance of physical assets during this decade. I agree 150%. And I think this is a super important statement. So if we just go a little bit about how do you encourage people to think new business models across technology and economy? Your best advice.
I think could I start, Klas, because I think you will put it together after I'm done. Because I think it is very important to go behind the words. So go behind business model. I mean, what's a business model? A business model is a way to monetize value creation. So I think that it's quite fundamental, in my view, that we step back and say, how do we actually create value? What are the customers and customer needs that we are actually satisfying, and how will they change, and what will customers be willing to pay for in the years to come? So that's just a way to unpack business models, I believe, and then by answering that, I mean, in our case, of course, if we say that one way that we create value is to make sure that systems of any kind works safely and effectively, it's quite obvious that that will be more data-driven in the future. And it's quite obvious that you would need some sort of a platform to be able to create that value in the future. And that platform is, of course, partly technology, but it's partly a business wrapping around it. And I think I will stop there and then let Klas talk about it his way, but that's at least my perspective.
Oh, and I think it's a very good perspective you bring on there, Rune. But I will add a little bit of a different perspective on it, Silvija. I think it goes both for technology leaders, you can say, but also business leaders, that if you have operated in your own environment for a certain amount of time, you actually become comfortable in that modus of operation. So I think it is also important to actually look at people who might not have been successful or is not successful within the technology or business environment and see how they would actually structure a new business for the future. So looking at, if you take the sports metaphor, if you won 8 Olympic gold medals, you're not as hungry for your 9th medal compared to the one that hasn't won any medal at all. And that makes something to your mind. That goes for both technology and it goes also for the business side. So by combining people that are successful with people that are really hungry for success, will actually create new type of sparks. And that I think goes for technology and it goes for the business aspect. And for me, that is also very much about cross-fertilizing between industries. Because by doing that cross-fertilization with 150 years of history, compared to other industries, which DNV, for example, might not have been active in, then you create those environments for creating that spark, both on the technology side, but also on the business side, including how we create value and how we capture value for the future, and how customers and customers actually value the creation from DNV in this case. So that is a little bit of a different perspective of it, Silvija. And you can almost say it links back to Machiavelli, almost around what creates success and how is the hunger for success and who would like to embrace change.
I'll have to read up. I forgot. So that's a good reading advice. But Rune, very quickly, digital assurance.
Yes.
A terribly complex word or concept. And it could mean ensuring that or using digital tools to certify or do things like that. Or it could be certifying the digital, such as data algorithms. What does it mean and why is it important?
No, I think first, as you mentioned, we believe that making sure that algorithms will work will be as important as making sure that structures or physical assets will work in the future. And if we in a way think about it, what have we done historically when we are making sure that the ship is built according to a standard? That is actually assuring that it's built according to standard, meaning that it's that the building specification is followed, which in itself is an algorithm. If we conceptually move then into digital algorithms, we believe that society will need the same thing to be assured, meaning that the safety net in society will be created to a large degree by algorithms. And if we shall have a well-functioning society, we need to make sure that that safety net actually works. And of course, we don't know exactly how that plays out, but we do think that, for example, with artificial intelligence, that there will be a need for someone standing on the outside and let's say metaphorically looking into the algorithm and making sure that it works. And that will be, of course, not a one-off, but it has to be continuous because it is a learning algorithm by definition. So essentially, it is that, I mean, in earlier days, when new things happened, it happened physically. And then there was a need to make sure that those physical transitions happened in control. And now we see a much deeper transition, and hence an even more deeper and more complicated need that it will, let's say, work in society's interests, which will be that it works safely and reliably. So I think what we mean with digital assurance or assurance of digital assets is making sure that, let's say, a digitized society is a safe, reliable, and sustainable society. And we would like to contribute to that.
Very cool. Any final words from you, Klas? What do you think is the most important success factor for this strategic disruption in a good way?
That from my side would be to build on your strength and know how you create value, but then also be bold enough to really try out new things and not only have a theater to show that you're trying out new things, but actually put some skin in the game of really trying it out and also supporting it. That would be my most important advice.
Rune?
I think in addition to what we have already said, or maybe I'm repeating myself, but I think it is very fundamental when things are happening really, really fast is to think through what is actually your value creation, and then make sure that you are future-proof in how you deliver your value creation, and that's obviously by taking into account all technologies, including digital technologies, as best as you can. But at the same time, as you stressed in the beginning, no company in the future will be a company if it's not dealing with what it does in a sustainable way. So we have to understand how we can create value in a way that doesn't damage the world long term. So I think that's to think those things through very carefully is important for everybody.
I'm not going to go through the recommended literature that both of you had, because you both have brilliant books, including the Brené Brown Dare to Lead from Klas and the Mission Economy by Mariana Mazzucato that was brought up by Rune. There's one I want to ask you just very briefly about, Rune, and it's the Grand Transitions. We haven't talked about that book in Learn before, and I think it's a very important mention. Why is it an important book?
Yeah, this is a book by Vaclav Smil, who is an author who writes a lot about, I guess, how the world works, or it has worked. So the book is basically about how has modern society been shaped, and that means how has energy transitioned, how has agriculture transitioned, how has the economy transitioned, how has urbanization happened, and so on, and not the least how all these forces play together. So there's not a simple formula for change, meaning that the changes that happen in society are interlinked. And when we talk about the impact of the digitalization, I think it's a very important learning that how all these forces come together. And when we are able to understand it, then we can, let's say, increase efficiency and productivity without sacrificing sustainability. So I think, and Vaclav Smil, I guess he has written books on energy and on food and everything. I mean, I would highly recommend many of his books. And here it's quite easy to read. I mean, he has a very easy style, and he kind of combines, let's say, a set of sciences in a very good way. But it is about the complexity in transitions and how that we cannot simplify too much, because then we are fooling ourselves. So it's quite interesting.
Very cool. It just gave me an idea. I think we're going to create a reading group, digital reading group for some of these books. Rune and Klas, thank you so much, both of you, for participating in this very inspiring and educational conversation.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here.
Du har nå lyttet til en podcast fra Learn.tech, en læringsdugnad om teknologi og samfunn. Nå kan du også få et læringssertifikat for å lytte til denne podcasten på vårt online-universitet Learn.university.